November 9th at 7:32. Order. Approval of minutes. Start with the 10/13 Easton Board of Education special meeting. Changes, comments. Just telling us we're being recorded. Got it. There we go. Okay. All right. Hearing none, we'll approve them unanimous consent, and we'll move to the October 22nd, 22 Easton Reading Region 9 Joint Boards of Education regular meeting. Good, okay. Approve the unanimous consent as well. Public comment? No public present. Board member comment? All right. No comment. John, you're good?
Nothing for me. Thank you.
You bet. We'll move on to number 5, administrative reports.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. We have 2 short administrative reports. Hopefully start with Dr. Pearson Hugo, who has an update from about the science of reading and also a report on social studies.
So this month you received something in writing from me regarding the science of reading. This is a very important topic in our state, and I've spoken about it in past meetings. I will continue to update you on this topic as we move forward. As you know, we have addressed the importance of the science and reading in the way that we have paced our curriculum in K through 3 by adding a very intentional focus on decoding phonological awareness and really setting aside discrete time for that. As I've mentioned in the past, the state has made an unusual step in mandating districts to use a particular set of resources, programs, and that is highly unusual for the state. So I would say that is still really a developing topic because this could come to be true, a reality for us here in Easton. It is certainly my responsibility to gather more information. So to that end, I spent 2 full days last week hearing from the vendors and then really interviewing them regarding their resources, taking a look at the materials. And I was accompanied by all of our literacy specialists in Easton and Reading. We are just beginning to receive some price codes and whether we would decide to make a proposal as a part of our budget request for next year or the following year. I would say that is still really developing. Superintendents across the state certainly have very strong feelings about this. And certainly the short timeline that the state has provided for us to implement new programs. And so December 16th is an important date for us because that is the deadline for us to indicate to the state our selection of programs or to request a delay due to lack of funding, which seems logical because of course we don't have a budget approved for next year by December 16th, or to request a waiver. The waiver is really not a real waiver. It's not possible to get a waiver because the state will only approve a comprehensive full program and will only approve something that's on that list. So if we were to move forward, I can say with comfort that it would cost us several $100,000. It's the hit to the budget, and we are still learning more about these programs, but I do want you to have that update because it's an important topic. I also want to share that yesterday was a terrific full day of professional learning here in Easton, and I will provide more information about that in my December report. But to provide another update about our social studies work, our middle school social studies teachers spent a full day together and spent some time discussing the curriculum. I shared some of the questions that have been raised by this board and really talked about the written curriculum versus the taught curriculum and going back to the framework. So we spent a fair amount of time going back to the framework, raising questions, really thinking about exactly what they do, and then the words that they chose to put in the curriculum document. So they need to continue that work in January because they certainly didn't finish, but they've already made a few adjustments. They've added concept of migration in the regions of Africa unit. They removed the specific concept of hate, bias, discrimination, violence, and genocide as a standalone concept. And looking at grade 8, they looked at those enduring understandings for the Civil War, and they pulled language directly from the state standards. So rather than having our own internally written statement regarding the abolition of slavery and racism, the language from the state statute specifically says individuals, groups, and institutions in the United States both promoted and hindered people's struggles for freedom, equality, and social justice. So that comes from the framework. That work will continue. So our next full professional day is in January, and those conversations will continue. And we will also be looking at our common assessments. They do not at this time have common Easton and Reading assessments. And that will be another opportunity for them to look closely at the Connecticut Social Studies framework and determine how students could respond to the expectation of the standards in the framework and draw upon their experiences in classrooms to show mastery of the standards. So that work is ongoing, and I will provide you another update when we have it. We're also working on an introductory statement for families when we move forward to the public posting of these documents so that they really have an overview of the middle school social studies experience. The students will be exposed to at least 8 regions of the world. They'll use the lens of geography to understand economics and et cetera, et cetera. So it was a productive day.
Is any of this captured at the state testings?
No,
No. they don't-
it really isn't. College board assessments include the integration of social studies topics and science topics, but that's not state level, that's national.
Great.
Stephanie, when will we have a written document that we can review? Because I do think the board has an obligation to approve this. And I think it seems to me like we should be doing this before we get any farther into the year than we have to.
Right, so January is the next full professional day. In the past, this board in particular has really would prefer not to pull teachers out of their classroom to do curriculum work. That is always an option. I will say that we are struggling to find substitute teachers. I was planning to continue in January.
Which would then lead to what in terms of something?
I think after a full day of work, they would be in a place to have the revisions in a place where I could bring them in turn to the joint curriculum committees and then in turn come back to the board.
So we're talking about the February board meeting?
Most likely, assuming that they can accomplish that on the day of January. But I think they can. They got a fair amount done yesterday.
What were the 2 things removed? Can you say that one more? The enduring understanding.
The enduring understanding regarding the Civil War, they changed an enduring understanding and when they lifted language directly from the state statute. The 7th grade Regions of Africa unit, they removed the specific concept of hate in the parenthetical statement, bias, discrimination, violence, genocide, as a standalone concept, and they added the concept of migration, which they felt was an important. They are still working on integrating that important idea of how hope and resilience is also an outcome of some of these discussions, and how the actions and inactions of people play a role in events. So that's something that they're still working on.
and Easton Reading is not totally in line, but they're in the same sort of category as far as developing the curriculum.
Well, they're together doing Easton Reading, they share a curriculum, so I think the issue at hand here is really the difference between what's in writing and what's taught. I don't see substantial changes in what they're teaching, I see a difference in what we're putting in writing and ultimately the way that we will assess the students.
Anything else for Stephanie?
Making sure everyone understands the science of reading changes and implications. I sent you that letter from CATS, pretty detailed, talked about how they disagreed with how the State Department of Education is interpreting the legislation. And the components of the science of reading and the requirement for a school district to select a reading program that could cost $400,000, $500,000. So that letter is a really good overview, kind of the history and the legislature and the waiver and process. And in mid-December, as Dr. Pearson pointed out, we've got to make some decisions about whether we apply for a waiver, which is a non-waiver, right? Or whether we say we're going to delay the program for a year.
That was my question. The delay would be for a year?
The delay would be for you.
That's just a budgetary delay.
It's not the only reason you're allowed to ask for a delay is for lack of funding.
So it would go into 24-25 budget.
Correct.
Earliest.
And that's assuming that the state doesn't pull back from me.
I can't imagine any school districts are prepared because nobody's got their funding in place for it. Are they,
Let alone the demand on the vendors.
Right.
There are 6 vendors. There were only 5 companies. I mean, there are 5 vendors for 6 programs. And it's quite a demand that they would need to respond to in a time when all companies are having supply chain shortages.
Oh, and
We had our math workers.
Would the grant money that is coming from the federal government surrounding COVID, is any of that money available to put forward to that end? Because it all has to be spent by the end of 23-24.
The ARP ESSER needs to be spent by the end of next year. It would require rewriting the grant, and I'm not sure it really fits in line with the way that grant was written, because it is supposed to be quite specific to pandemic relief, and not to mention the supplement, not supplant rules of all grants.
Well, if this new research showing that this tied to the science of reading is going to help us recover from the lack of educational advancement that took place during COVID, then perhaps there's a way to.
it's a core program though. It's not, the federal legislation says that those dollars should be spent for supplemental programs. It can't be like the core reading curriculum. So like if it was spent on supplemental tutoring to support that program, that would be fine.
Yeah, I mean, it could be two accessory things, so. There's give and take to that, right? So currently that money is aimed at people as well as other resources, so then it would be funding. The
Okay,
people.
just if it's not doable, it's not doable, but I just thought that there was an opportunity to go.
All creative thinking is encouraged here because.
John.
Yeah, John.
There was quite a bit of talk amongst other districts as well about fiscal cliffs. And I know we, thanks to the partnership with our Board of Finance, we're able to set ourselves up so that we weren't, approaching a fiscal cliff. But I think there are going to be a lot of districts who are going to have very little funding for making this happen. So I don't think we're going to be out there on a ledge, sort of pushing this a year.
No, I don't know how this literally works, but the towns, your colleagues around the state, go to Hartford, what are we doing here? We have so many other needs, not that this is important, but this seems like it was awfully hasty, or unless this has been something that's been in the works that we've seen, or no?
The science of reading is certainly a topic that has had increasing importance and has been more in the spotlight, I would say, in recent years. And that's related to a concern that students are struggling with reading in ways that they simply shouldn't be struggling. The districts in our area, from my work with the people in my role in other places, is very similar. We are all using very similar programs, which include a combination. Most of the Durgay districts have some type of a readers and writers workshop model. And in addition to that, they use phonics programs. Specifically, we use foundations. We use Haggerty in the early grades. And we've recently extended foundations into the 3rd grade so that they have one more year of really direct phonics instruction. That's very common practice in Durgay community. So there is actually a question about if we were to spend, say, $400,000 on this comprehensive all-in-one program, what happens if the test scores go down? Because who's to say that this would be better than what we are? So there would be some things that we would not need to order if we have this comprehensive program, but there's no way that it's an apples to apples type of financial.
Do curriculum mandates typically come from the state with that vendor qualification?
Never.
Pick from these 5. This
This
is
has
brand new.
never happened before, where they have mandated the resource. They've mandated the inclusion of topics in our curriculum, certainly. But for the legislation to be passed at the state level, and then from the State Department of Education to issue a memo to superintendents stating you must do this, using these vendors, that is, I mean, it's never happened in my time.
Yeah, it's happening all over the country, sadly. I mean, it just is. Virginia's doing it right now. Like, because there's like a push against certain types of reading instruction.
They're mandating specific vendors.
It's similar to what Connecticut did. Like they have a state committee that goes through and they look at a set of criteria. And based on those criteria, they choose. Because, right.
They choose for you.
Right, because there's a body of research that experts believe is the best research for early reading instruction. And so reading scores are dropping, maybe not here, but I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It is happening in other states. It is very surprising that it's happening here.
Yeah, I mean, we agree with the science of reading research, so we are not in opposition with the idea behind this. The issue here is really telling us exactly which programs we should be. Flexibilities.
We'll provide another update to you soon, and conditions may change within the next month in terms of pressure the state is getting from superintendents and school districts and advocacy groups like CAPS. So that things may change, but we'll wait and see. Okay, so Ms. Scribani
Okay.
can present an overview.
An overview of a couple of things coming out. So we'll start with the big one, which is that I am keeping a very close eye on your health claims, because you'll notice that is a significant claim. I think we were anticipating that there would be higher claims this year, and that has come to fruition. And so we'll continue to keep an eye on those numbers, but your October claim is 285.33, which is, if you take a look at our past claims, that's a significant cost to us.
Is that coming because of inflation? Like things are just higher, or is it more claims?
More claims. We were anticipating that it would be high. So I'll continue to watch that and keep you updated. Then I also wanted to, that pretty much is the most significant thing that we are taking a look at. We've also started, believe it or not, budget planning process for next year. So we are looking at creating, once again, the website, all of the documents up online for you to see. I think that is, I think everyone's, I think, familiar with that. I know, that Alicia, you're new, but I think you saw that. There's a website and the Google Sheets.
So I read it last.
So once again, you can anticipate seeing all that. We also are adding in some actuals so that we can make sure that we are aligning what we actually spent with the budgeted amounts. I am seeing some increases already, just to sort of let you know, inflationary pushes as well as, so I'm seeing that in, just the cost of everything from the cost of our software and our licensing for our Google products down right along through our, paper and, our toilet paper and supplies for maintenance. So we are watching that closely and we'll have some, obviously some transparency with exactly what those costs were last year and what we anticipate those to be moving forward.
So the budget process was really 2.0, right? And the inclusion of the Google Sheets, increased transparency, and those tools that you saw. We're also reviewing and adding a couple of layers internally to make the process a little bit easier for our staff. We're also including some accountability in terms of how staff arrive at prices that they research and and seek. So we're looking at that. And I think the one part that you mentioned there, which is a nice feature, is the idea that, and we talked about this last year, but we couldn't do it because we moved to Google and the new format, but we also changed financial systems the year before to e-finance. And so we're hoping this year to be able to add the actual expenditure in a certain place as well.
Now, the caveat to that is that we did change account codes last year, sort of in the middle of the year. And so I've tried hard to reconcile some of those, but as we go through it, through the budget process, there were some things that were used at the very beginning of the year, but then were sort of changed, the account code was changed, so I'm trying to line those up. But when we do a summary and an overview, I'll have to walk you through that, because sometimes it does look, for some of the items, it looks a little bit odd.
You recategorize things into bigger, different buckets.
I
is what
did.
You did.
Yeah. Okay. But our internal systems of accounting, when they switch from one thing to the other, they had an account that was sort of, a very specific example is that we used a particular number for heating oil, and we changed that number. So it might look, for example, that we spent a very small amount on heating oil, because at the beginning of the year, for part of the year, we used this number, and then towards the end of the year, we used this number. So combining those together so that we can budget appropriately. I would say that we're about 80%, maybe 85% done some of that work. And then lastly, Mr. Parker is the chairman of our food services committee. I believe that's what it's called. And I just got some new guidance that I have not had the opportunity to share with him from the state on Tuesday, talking about some of our funds and how we can spend those. So I will be reaching out to him to talk about bringing that committee together to look at our school lunches and to make some decisions in that regard.
And the most pressing decision to make is what happens in January. Do we charge? Do we not charge? Do we change prices when that federal subsidy ends?
Ends January 1st.
Well, that is going to be part of the discussion with the committee.
Okay.
Because the committee could decide to perhaps move that based on some new guidance.
Okay.
Into later on in the month, into February 1st, but we haven't had a chance to really do a deeper dive into that.
Question?
Yes.
Is there, and I recognize that this would not be the right time to do this, but at some point, will you take all of the salaries and encumber them?
So yes, and also you have some staff that switch from one building to another. So making those changes. I started a document with our director of HR to work on all of that with Vicky Cram, and I'm not finished yet, but that will come to the board so that you can see those salaries in the correct buckets.
Well, I'm really thinking more about if we were to continue down the road that we're going down in terms of our healthcare and the costs involved with that. It's possible that we might need to take some of the excess money that we may have at the end of this year to help underwrite that. So the sooner we know what our unexpended budget items could be, the better off we. That's the thinking.
Yes, absolutely. We are exactly on the same page with that, because I do want to watch that very carefully so that we can make sure that we have the appropriate in our health care account.
Great.
I think that's everything I have to do with that.
Okay. That's it, very much straightforward, very good. All right, move right along. Item number 6. Discussion of possible action, 2023 Easton Board Meeting Calendar. My hand is out.
Yes.
Okay, I can do that.
Thank you.
So the purpose of this, obviously to set our calendar, eventually, we can vote on it next meeting, but just to get everyone on the same page, we talked a little bit about this, I think, at the tri-board meeting, so to speak. Setting up, most importantly, the budget calendar, and then obviously the regular meetings that roll through the calendar year 23. I guess, any conflicts that you know of automatically, I have one for the 14th of March, but I don't think anything else.
After spring.
Are we proposing to change the start time of meetings?
Oh, I added that there, if you wanted to talk about that.
We can talk about it, sure.
Is that what that means?
The big change is the budget presentation last year was on a Saturday, the 21st. And we're aligning that to move that to January 10th. And Reading would go on the same week on January 12th. And then you've got your subsequent meetings and workshops that are kind of built in.
And I'm guessing part of the reason for the 7 o'clock is that the idea of sitting in your office, cooling your heels from whenever you get done until 7:30 would be it would be more inviting to be able to cool your heels until 7 and then have the meeting. I guess I think they're doing it running as well.
Reading just did a complete year of meetings at 7 p.m.
Okay.
Last year. It seemed to work pretty well. There was someone in the board last year that had a conflict with 7:30. I don't know whether that conflict still remains. Sorry, the Easton board.
It's probably me. It's just tough. My husband works in Darien. His store is open till 6, and by the time he closes the store and get home, it's just tough for me. But, you know, I feel bad if I'm the only reason, you know, you could start and I can show up late or join remotely. It's just tough for me to commit to 7 on a regular basis with his schedule.
Yeah, I think we had also discussed the sort of the impact on recruiting new members and the sort of possibility of, you know, certain people who might be commuting from the city not being able to attend those meetings regularly, or not being able to sort of volunteer for this. But I think as we're settling into the sort of new normal after COVID and remote work options, I do think that that's less of a concern from my perspective. And I could see a sort of 7 o'clock option, and I think Jen is spot on that, you know, the sort of joining for the first 30 minutes remotely and then sort of joining in person. I think we can accommodate that from a technical perspective.
I mean, if it makes better use of your time in the afternoon, I think that's beneficial to us, right? You know, if we want to optimize your time in the office and our time here, and I did commute to New York City today and I made it here on time, so possible. You know, whatever's more efficient.
But we can't vote on it.
No, we can just discuss the benefits of it.
No,
Or
that's
the-
right,
or the-
that's right. I'm gonna just make a note, but so Reading's meeting in March is the 7th. Would anybody, just as a placeholder, be opposed to March 9th, which is a Thursday for us? Or is that, and you guys up from the administrative standpoint? I mean, it's a fun week, but
March 9th.
anybody know if it's not a holiday, it's like
Right.
Groundhog's Day or something like that.
It's Thursday, and I just have to check to see if Reading
Reading
scheduled that as,
Thursday.
yes, but if they had a budget workshop, they reserved that. That's up
Oh.
there.
Yeah, I think that the cadence that we were looking at with Reading was that we were going to do sort of Tuesdays and they were going to do Thursdays.
Actually, March 9th is clear.
Yeah, third and 12th are budget work.
Is an option.
March 9th is not- okay, yeah, I had Reading on the 5th, John, of March, and then us on the 12th.
Nice.
Sunday, is that possible?
That's the start. Yeah, you need the 6th and the 13th.
Well, I don't know. No, it's I don't know, but anyway, I think the night, so we'll just pencil that in for now. We're not gonna,
The March 9th instead of the 14th.
correct.
Jason, you left us staring at the ceiling. Just
How's it look?
we might need to replace that light.
Okay, that's that. I wanted you to see that light, John. There we go. Sorry.
Put it in the budget.
Yes.
March 9th.
Okay. What Chris had shared was the 5th and the 12th, and then they're in front of their public hearing is the 19th, so I think, anyways, okay. So that's,
Everything else looks good, March 9th. And then you can table the discussion about 7:30, well, obviously with 7.
Yep. Consideration. I think generally speaking, if it assists the administration, and then we'll see if we can make it work.
Yeah, I support
Technology.
either one, you know, either is good for me.
Okay, 6B. Creating facilities committee to study infrastructure needs.
Okay, well.
I mean, it's, Yeah, please.
I'll give you my insights.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be great.
Well, there was a report that the previous administration commissioned. And I don't know exactly how much faith to put in some of these numbers, but they identified projects at Samuel Staples and at Helen Keller, and in fact, all the 5 schools. And certainly the numbers are old at this point, but the projects that they identified as possible repairs and replacement are things we should consider.
Yes.
And in Reading, there is a facilities committee. And at the facilities committee, we essentially look ahead to large repairs that need to be made. This is an example of kind of the Reading facility, which the Reading board approves. And then we present the capital plan to the town of Reading, and the town of Reading folds that into their capital plan. And then kind of a relationship between the facilities committee, the board, the Reading board, and the town of Reading. And so I went back and looked at the capital plan for the town of Easton. And I've only been here for 14 months or so, but I only see capital plans over the next few years that are town related. So things like police cars, the replacement of the library roof, fire engine replacements, an excavator, various public work projects and so on. And so there are some projects that we need to take care of in terms of maintaining schools, and there may be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. But there are larger projects that could be, for example, the replacement of the Helen Keller roof, irrigation and drainage around the building, the incorporation of a sump pump in the elevator shaft here, the parking lot over at Samuel Staples. And I would hate to see those large investments when we're talking $300,000, for example, or $1 million for a roof, to crowd out the type of investment that we need to make into the classroom and teaching and learning. And for those things to crowd out kind of our operation budget. So the idea is to start identifying what our needs are over the next several years, and you can see kind of how the Reading plan there identified certain things. And start talking with the town, having that conversation, getting some numbers on what our needs are, and just planning ahead. And it's one of our strategic priorities that we talked about at the last tri-board meeting, which is really getting a good sense of what our capital needs are over the next few years. So that's why Randy and I talked, and we thought we should add it to the agenda. And perhaps there's a couple of members, a couple of you who would be like to serve on that committee if we wanted to create that type of research. And that's really wanted to tee that up.
Sign me up, coach.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in roofing, but I'd be happy to be involved.
Guess what, you will be, if you're done with this.
Well, no, I'm very interested in making sure that the facilities are not just maintained, but kept to a standard that's worthy of our system, you know, it's sure it feels like, let's make sure that
That's such a beautiful school.
we do, we have beautiful schools and a beautiful town, and it should look that way.
Yeah, and there are things that you don't immediately see. Well, when you leave the building
Like the
tonight
sun pump
and
in
you
the
hear the one of the rooftop units rattling away on the roof, and if you've ever seen the Helen Keller roof, it looks like it's seen better days. But there are things like I said, the sump pump in the elevator, the classroom unit ventilators. So
At this school.
if you've been into a classroom recently, and you look at the unit ventilators, that's the mechanism that provides heat to the building. And they're identified as exceeded their useful life, and that doesn't mean they may not work for another 2 or 3 years, but there is state grant money available right now for HVAC projects. And we could be going after that money if we wanted to do a project. But in order to do a project, we have to identify, study it. The committee would have to approve it. It would have to go into a master plan. The town would have to support it. Then we could go after the grant funds. You can't get the grant funds until you followed all of those steps. So there's money on the table. We wanted to
Dr. McKinnon, sorry.
For example, yes, John?
Do you know if Reading produced a charge for their committee?
I believe that there's a town benchmark of what they consider as a capital project over the value of $20,000. And I do believe that there's a charge for the Reading Facilities Committee.
Okay, I'm very supportive of this. I'm really glad you're bringing this to us, and I would hope that we vote on this, and I would hope that we'd approve it in December. But I think we'll get a lot further down the field if we have a charge that we're looking at to discuss, and that we can clearly understand sort of what are the roles and responsibilities, and what does it mean to be a part of this committee.
Thank you, John. There's something, there's an added layer if you wanted to go deeper in this, but if you see at the bottom of the Reading Facilities, the capital plan, there's something called EdSpecs design in phase 1. And last week, I developed an RFP for architecture and design services. It wasn't just looking at roofs, bathrooms, HVAC. It was actually looking at design and furniture. And the RFP was approved, and we're going to be inviting, we have probably 6 or 7 architect firms that are going to come in and go through Reading Elementary School and John Reed Middle School next week. And they're going to give us a proposal and a vision for the types of enhancements that we would make to our instructional spaces. So not just those infrastructure needs, but do we need new furniture? Almost like the design that you've seen from ELF in the way in which you're incorporating new furniture in the cafeteria for some type of innovative 21st century collaborative space that's going to focus on and enhance learning. The Reading board committed to that work. And part of the reason we supported it was because we brought it to the facilities committee, which encouraged us to develop an RFP. We did, and they approved it from the board, and we're moving forward. And that will be presented hopefully by the end of December, and we'll be able to present that vision to the long range planning committee in Reading as well. So that is another example, other than just facilities, that you could look at that could help.
John, did I hear you volunteer for that committee?
I think so, Jeff.
I mean, in the end, communities do a lot of the legwork, right? They always have, they always bring it back to the board. Everybody is welcome to attend, but there's going to be a lot of legwork involved in doing this, because part of this is helping, whether Egg Nagy is a member of this committee or some other folks in the town. He's in
He needs to be.
Yeah, he does. Yep. So a lot of coordination, and there's time spent on these things. So it's not all glamour.
I don't think any of it's.
I was being facetious. Yes. All right. Good.
I wrote down some names.
Perfect.
I think it's a great idea. Let's
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. It's
Well,
overdue.
I'm not certain.
It's overdue. Okay. Board committee reports. Have DEI's meeting coming up.
No.
December 5th.
Monday, December 5th, so the wellness committee also met at Overall High School. We had jalapeno potato chips. They were very good.
Sample, or this was just.
They always
It's
bring
actually
it
not
food.
part of the agenda.
But no, just as a side note, we talked about updating a policy for kind of nutrition and coming down from the state, and then we also, which Stephanie can provide more details on, and we just also talked about similar potentially increases in food costs and how that's impacting purchasing. Very committed.
Yeah, most of our conversation was about the wellness policy revision. So there are a number of legislative updates that will inform changes to our existing wellness policy. I spent a full day with two of our health teachers, really looking at both the Shipman recommended policy and trying to use that as a base, and then including sort of context language from the ER9 existing policy, and then we flipped it and we did it the other way. We used the ER9 existing wellness policy, and then we added the legislative updates and felt that that was much more readable to whoever might be the policy. So that is the policy that will now be advanced to the board policy committee.
The food service committee will be meeting. I need to meet with Sarah one more time before I set it up. But the hope is that we can bring firm recommendations to the tri-board meeting on January 31st, and be able to vote in whatever the committee comes up with in terms of the cost of a regular lunch or a regular breakfast. It has nothing to do with the a la carte. The a la carte has been, students have been paying for that from the beginning, but for these, what we can just call the standard meal, those have all been free for the past 2 years. And now that the state money is going to run out at the end of this year, we need to come up with what the proper price should be.
Is there a possibility that we need a decision before January 31st?
There might be a possibility that we need. that
Okay, well, that's
discussion.
when you said there was.
Yeah.
I think
So
we also need to look at what our overage is that we've gathered so far. I know that we made up the difference that happened a couple of years ago, and now we're back in the black, and measure what would it cost us to extend it until February the 1st.
Yes,
Understanding that there'd be a meeting on the 31st and new prices would be out, kind of prepare parents.
the guidelines may require us to publish that sooner.
Oh.
But they are, on Tuesday, they said more to follow soon, which probably will be tomorrow. So as soon as I get those dates, I'll share with you the memo that came from them, and we can go from there. But it may be that we have to have a meeting earlier.
Okay.
We might need a Christmas Eve drug meeting.
I can't wait to see who's gonna be there.
Hold on. Good job. Talking about school. That's no.
I'll be wrapping my Christmas gifts as we're moving.
Or John, do you recall when the Board of Finance publishes the meeting dates for the various bodies in town for the budget dates?
Presentations.
Yeah, so you should be hearing from Christine Calvert. They generally charge her to start scheduling those, in December-ish. But if you reached out to her, she'd be able to tell you. She'll have a very crisp memory of the last several years and be able to tell you.
Very good. I didn't hear back, but Christine's makes more sense.
Yeah, the other first round, I think, John, isn't the first dance is in April, then the second dance is late April.
Yeah, and then final presentations and approval in May, right?
Right. Well, and early May, maybe first or second, something like that, because the vote's going to be.
That's right. That's right. And remember, we basically present 3 times.
Right.
Yep.
Twice to the Board of Finance and once to the. Well, actually.
To the town, right?
A lot of.
Oh, yeah. Very lucky.
I like making them.
All right, any other committee reports to report on? No? Okay, right. Board member comment. I just appreciate everybody's flexibility. There was some head fakes. We're having one, we're not having one, we're having one. But it was important to have this, I think, even just to have the discussion. We didn't move on anything, but we had a good discussion, so. Don, you have anything else?
Nothing for me. Thanks, everyone.
Got it. Going, motion to adjourn. We'll accept one.
So moved.
All right, Jeff. Devin, Jeff, John,
Sure.
excellent.
8:20.
Thank you, gang. Wow.
That's pretty darn good. Pretty darn good.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.